The dust settled like a shroud over Matthew Zane's face as he stared down the barrel of his Winchester. The last members of his former gang riding away with everything he had as gold, his reputation, and the last shred of trust he'd ever place in another human being. Blood trickled from the wound in his shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the hole they'd left in what remained of his soul. This was Globe, Arizona Territory, 1883, and Matthew Zane had just learned the harshest lesson the West had to offer. In a land of opportunity and lawlessness, loyalty was as rare as rain. Matthew had been riding with the Corday gang for 3 years. 3 years of holdups, 3 years of running, 3 years of believing he'd finally found brothers who would stand by him. When the lawmen from Tucson had ambushed them at Eagle Pass, Matthew had stayed to fight, to give the others time to escape with the bank haul. His reward was a bullet in the shoulder and the sight of his so-called friends disappearing over the ridge with his share of the money. They'd left him for dead, or worse, for prison. But Matthew was nothing if not resilient. He'd managed to lose the posse in the canyons, his horse pushing through exhaustion until it finally collapsed 15 miles outside of Globe. He'd walked the rest, his boots filling with blood, his throat parched from thirst. Now, 3 months later, Matthew had carved out a solitary existence on the outskirts of town. He'd used the last of his emergency money to buy a small, dilapidated ranch that no one else wanted, a patch of hardscrabble desert with a one-room cabin, a rickety barn, and a well that was nearly dry. The locals called it Fool's Last Stop, a place where dreams came to die under the merciless Arizona sun. Matthew didn't mind. He wasn't chasing dreams anymore. He was hiding from nightmares. Zane, Sheriff Holbrook's voice cut through the morning like a knife. Matthew turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster before he remembered he wasn't wearing it. He'd stopped carrying his Colt around town. It invited too many questions, too many challenges from young guns looking to make a name. Sheriff, Matthew acknowledged, his voice rough from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to anyone. Got a letter for you, Holbrook said, extending a weathered envelope. Came in on yesterday's stage. Figured you wouldn't be coming into town anytime soon. Matthew took the envelope without comment. He hadn't received a letter in years. Whoever was writing probably didn't know he was still alive. You know, the sheriff said, not moving from his spot. Folks in town are starting to talk. Man who keeps to himself the way you do, either he's running from something or running toward something worse. Matthew stared at the lawman, his eyes giving away nothing. Appreciate the delivery, he said finally, turning back toward his cabin. The sheriff sighed. Suit yourself, Zane. But Globe's a growing town. Can't stay invisible forever. Matthew waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before opening the letter. It was from an old friend in Denver, one of the few who knew he was still breathing. The Corday gang had been spotted in New Mexico territory. They were moving west. He crumpled the paper in his fist. Let them come. He'd be waiting. The weeks passed in a blur of hard work and solitude. Matthew repaired the cabin's leaking roof, reinforced the corral fencing, and even managed to coax some life from the parched soil behind the house. He wasn't farming for profit, just enough to keep himself fed. He sold excess vegetables in town once a month, speaking only when necessary, avoiding the saloon and the curious stares of Globe's residents. To the people of Globe, Matthew Zane was a ghost, drifting through their lives without leaving a trace. Some said he was a deserter from the army. Others whispered he was a gunslinger hiding from his past. A few even thought he might be a wealthy Easterner escaping scandal. Nobody knew the truth, and Matthew preferred it that way. Until she arrived. It was late September when the Prescott stage rolled into Globe, bringing with it a woman the likes of which the town had never seen. While most newcomers arrived dusty and defeated, Willa Zimmerman stepped down from the coach looking as fresh as a spring morning. Her emerald traveling dress might have been wrinkled from the journey, but her spine was straight, her chin high, and her eyes a startling shade of amber took in the town with keen intelligence. Matthew was loading supplies into his wagon when he first saw her. She was arguing with the stage driver, who seemed intent on dumping her trunks in the street and departing. I was assured there would be accommodations. Her voice carried across the street, cultured but firm. This cannot be the entirety of Globe. The driver spat tobacco juice dangerously close to her polished boots. Lady, this is it. Hotel's down yonder, if they got room. If not, there's a boarding house for respectable women behind the church. That's your choices. And my equipment? These crates cannot simply be left here. Matthew didn't know what possessed him to walk over. Perhaps it was the flash of panic that crossed her composed features, or maybe it was simply that she was the first interesting thing to happen in Globe since he'd arrived. I can help with those, he said. His voice so unused it came out as a croak. Both the woman and the driver turned to look at him. The driver seemed relieved. There you go, madam. Local help. He tipped his hat and climbed back onto the stage without waiting for her response. The woman Willa studied Matthew with those amber eyes. He was suddenly aware of his unkempt appearance, the 3-day beard, the dusty clothes, the hat that had seen better days. You're offering assistance? She asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. Matthew nodded. Got a wagon, he said, gesturing to where his buckboard stood. Can take you and your things to the hotel. She seemed to consider this, weighing her options. Finally, she extended a gloved hand. Willa Zimmerman. I'm the new schoolteacher. Matthew hesitated before taking her hand briefly. Matthew Zane. Do you have children attending the school, Mr. Zane? No, madam. No family. Something in his tone must have communicated more than his words, because her expression softened slightly. Well, I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Zane. I seem to have arrived somewhat unprepared for Globe's rustic charm. Matthew loaded her trunks and crates onto his wagon, marveling at the weight of some of them. When she saw his struggle with a particularly heavy one, she said, Books, Mr. Zane. A teacher's most precious possession. They rode to the hotel in silence. Matthew wasn't one for small talk, and Willa seemed content to observe the town as they traveled its dusty main street. Only when they arrived at the hotel did she speak again. I'm told the school has been closed for some months, she said. The previous teacher left rather abruptly. Matthew nodded. Took off after some miners caused trouble. Town council's been trying to get someone new. He didn't add that most of Globe had given up hope of finding a teacher willing to stay in a rough mining town where education was considered a luxury. Well, she said with determination, I intend to stay. I signed a contract, and I honor my commitments. For some reason, that simple declaration struck Matthew like a physical blow. Honor. Commitment. Words that had lost their meaning for him after Eagle Pass. He helped carry her belongings to her room, declining the coin she offered. No need, he said, already turning to leave. Mr. Zane, she called after him. He paused at the door. Thank you. It seems Globe has at least one gentleman. Matthew didn't correct her assumption. Let her believe what she wanted. It would be the last time their paths crossed if he had anything to say about it. But fate and Globe's small-town dynamics had other plans. 3 days later, Matthew was in Donovan's general store picking up supplies when Mayor Hollister cornered him by the flour barrels. Zane, the portly man said, too loudly for Matthew's comfort. Just the man I was hoping to find. Matthew nodded in acknowledgement, but continued examining the flour for weevils. Our new schoolteacher, lovely woman, educated back east, she's wanting to restore the schoolhouse before classes begin next week. Needs some repairs that are beyond what the ladies' auxiliary can manage. Matthew said nothing, already sensing where this was heading. Town council can pay a fair wage, Hollister continued. And Miss Zimmerman specifically asked if you might be available. That made Matthew look up. She asked for me? Hollister nodded, his jowls quivering with enthusiasm. Said you seemed handy and reliable. High praise from a lady of her caliber. Matthew should have said no. His instincts, honed from years of survival, screamed at him to decline. Getting involved in town matters meant visibility. Visibility meant questions. Questions meant trouble. Instead, he found himself saying, I'll look at it tomorrow. The schoolhouse was in worse shape than he expected. The roof leaked in 3 places, several windows were broken, and the floor had warped badly in one corner where water had seeped in. The desks, such as they were, had been gnawed by mice, and the blackboard was cracked down the middle. I realize it's quite a disaster, Willa said, standing in the doorway in a simple blue dress, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. But the children need a proper learning environment. Take more than a day's work, Matthew said, testing a floorboard with his boot. I understand. The mayor said you might be able to dedicate some time to it. The town council has approved funds for materials. Matthew considered the project. It would take at least 2 weeks of steady work to make the place habitable, longer to make it proper. 2 weeks of being in town every day, visible to everyone. 2 weeks of having to talk to suppliers, to council members. 2 weeks of seeing Willa Zimmerman. I'll need help with the roof, he said finally. Her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Wonderful. I've already spoken to Mr. Rivera at the lumber mill. He's agreed to provide materials at cost. As Matthew began work on the schoolhouse the next day, he couldn't help but notice how organized Willa was. She'd already created detailed lists of what needed to be done, prioritized by urgency. She'd secured donations from town merchants and arranged for several older boys to help with the heavy lifting after their chores were finished. What surprised him most was her willingness to work alongside him. While he replaced floorboards, she scraped old paint from the walls. When he mended the roof, she cleaned and repaired the desks below. You don't have to do this part, he told her on the third day, watching as she struggled with a particularly stubborn desk leg. Town hired me for the labor. I believe in leading by example, Mr. Zane, she replied, blowing a stray strand of hair from her face. How can I expect my students to respect their school if I'm unwilling to help create it? Matthew, he said suddenly. Just call me Matthew. She looked up, surprised. Then you must call me Willa. Something shifted between them, that day a small crack in the wall Matthew had built around himself. They worked in comfortable silence most of the time, but occasionally Willa would ask about a particular building technique or share a story from her teaching experiences back east. Matthew found himself responding with more than one-word answers, even asking a question or two of his own. By the end of the first week, the schoolhouse was taking shape. New windows let in light, fresh white paint brightened the walls, and the repaired roof no longer threatened to collapse. Word of the transformation spread through Globe, bringing curious onlookers and even a few volunteers. Matthew hated the attention but endured it for the sake of the project, for the sake of Willa's approving smile. On the 10th day, disaster struck. Matthew was working late, installing the last of the new window frames, when he heard a crash and a cry of pain from inside. He rushed in to find Willa on the floor, clutching her ankle, a fallen bookshelf beside her. I was trying to move it, she explained through gritted teeth. It was heavier than I expected. Matthew knelt beside her, concern overriding his usual reserve. Let me see. Her ankle was already swelling, an angry red mark spreading across the delicate skin. Matthew had seen enough injuries to know it wasn't broken, but the sprain was severe. Need to get you to the doctor, he said, already calculating how to carry her without causing more pain. No, I'm fine, truly. She tried to stand and gasped when her weight touched her injured foot. Without further discussion, Matthew lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body warm against his chest. For a moment, their eyes met, and Matthew felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a quickening of his pulse that had nothing to do with exertion. This isn't necessary, she protested weakly, but her arms slipped around his neck for support. It is, he replied, carrying her out to his wagon. The few people still on the street at that hour watched with interest as he placed her carefully on the seat and climbed up beside her. Dr. Simmons confirmed it was a bad sprain, not a break. Stay off it for at least a week, he advised, wrapping the ankle tightly. And keep it elevated when possible. Willa's face fell. But the school is set to open in 10 days. There's still so much to do. I'll finish it, Matthew said, surprising himself as much as Willa. You focus on getting better. The doctor raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he finished his work. When they were ready to leave, Matthew lifted Willa again, ignoring her protests. Where to, he asked. Hotel's got a lot of stairs. Willa bit her lip. The boarding house is worse. My room is on the 3rd floor. Matthew considered the problem, then made a decision that would change everything. My cabin, he said. It's all on 1 level. You can have the bed, I'll take the floor. Her eyes widened. That's not. I mean, it wouldn't be proper. Nothing improper about it, he said gruffly. You need rest, doctor's orders. My place is quiet, no stairs. When you're better, I'll bring you back. What he didn't say was that his cabin was isolated enough that no one would see her there, that no gossip would follow them. In a town like Globe, a single woman staying at a bachelor's home would be scandalous unless no one knew about it. After a moment of hesitation, Willa nodded. Thank you, Matthew. But only for a day or two, until I can manage the stairs at the boarding house. 1 day turned into 3, then a week. Matthew made her comfortable in his small cabin, giving her the bed while he slept on a pallet by the fire. During the days, he worked on finishing the schoolhouse, returning each evening with supplies and news from town. To his surprise, he found himself talking more during those evenings than he had in the past 3 years combined. Willa was a good listener, never pushing when he fell silent, but asking just the right questions to keep him opening up a little more each time. She told him about her life in Boston, about losing her parents to influenza and deciding to take the teaching position in Arizona Territory as a fresh start. He shared small, safe pieces of his past growing up on a farm in Missouri, working cattle drives in Texas, his skill with horses. What he didn't tell her was about the Corday gang, about Eagle Pass, about the betrayal that had driven him to isolation. Some secrets were too dark to share with someone as luminous as Willa. As her ankle healed, Matthew found himself dreading the day she would return to town. Her presence had transformed his Spartan cabin into something that almost felt like a home. The scent of her rose water perfume lingered in the air. The sound of her humming as she graded practice papers or planned lessons filled the empty spaces. Her books, she'd insisted he bring some from her trunks, were stacked neatly by the bed. For the first time since Eagle Pass, Matthew found himself looking forward to each new day. The night before she was to return to town, they sat together on his small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Willa's ankle was much improved. She could walk with only a slight limp now, but Matthew had insisted on carrying her outside to enjoy the evening air. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "So different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way." Matthew nodded, acutely aware of her presence beside him on the bench, of the faint scent of roses that always surrounded her. "Thank you," she continued, "for everything. Not many men would have been so kind to a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," he replied, the words coming out before he could stop them. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes catching the last light of day. "No, I suppose I'm not." She hesitated, then added, "Matthew, there's something I've been wondering. Why do you live out here, all alone? You're obviously skilled, capable. You could have a place in town, be part of the community." The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. For a wild moment, Matthew considered telling her everything: the robberies, the shooting, the betrayal. But the thought of seeing disgust replace the warmth in her eyes stopped him. "Some men aren't meant for community," he said finally. "I don't believe that," she replied, her hand moving to rest lightly on his arm. "Every person needs connection, needs to belong somewhere, with someone." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through him, breaking down defenses he'd thought impenetrable. "Not everyone deserves that chance," he said, his voice low. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Matthew." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Whatever happened before, it doesn't have to define what happens next." Before he could respond, the distant sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Matthew was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle that was never far from reach. "Stay here," he ordered, helping Willa to her feet and guiding her inside. "Lock the door behind me." "Matthew, what is it? Who's coming?" "Don't know yet. Could be nothing." But the prickle at the back of his neck told him otherwise. No one came out this way after dark unless they had specific business. He took his position at the corner of the cabin, rifle ready, as the riders came into view. 3 men, moving with purpose, their horses kicking up dust in the twilight. Matthew's blood ran cold as recognition hit him. The Corday gang, or what was left of it. Frank Corday himself, along with the Houston brothers. They'd found him. Inside the cabin, Willa peered through a crack in the shutters, her heart racing. She couldn't see much in the gathering darkness, just the silhouettes of men on horseback approaching slowly. The change in Matthew's demeanor terrified her more than the strangers. The gentle man who had cared for her had vanished, replaced by a coiled spring of lethal readiness. "Matthew, Zane," a voice called out. "We know you're there, old friend. Come on out and say hello." Matthew remained silent, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "Don't be like that, Matty," the voice continued. "We've been looking all over for you. Got something that belongs to you." "What do they want?" Willa whispered through the door. "Stay inside," Matthew replied tersely. Then, raising his voice, he called out, "Keep riding, Frank. Nothing for you here." A harsh laugh answered him. "Oh, I think there is. Your share from the Tucson job." We've been holding it for you. Willa's breath caught. The Tucson job? What was he talking about? Don't want it, Matthew shouted back. Don't want anything from you. Keep riding or start shooting. Your choice. There was a pause, then the sound of men dismounting. Come on, Matty. We thought you were dead. By the time we realized you'd given us the slip, you were gone. Took us months to track you down. Matthew said nothing, his fingers steady on the trigger. We can do this the easy way, Frank called out. Or we can burn you out. Maybe check that cabin of yours first, see if you've got company. Smoke seems to be coming from your chimney. Awful domestic for a lone wolf like you. The threat to Willa made something snap inside Matthew. Without warning, he fired a shot, the bullet kicking up dirt at the feet of the men. Next one won't miss, he warned. Leave. Now. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering wood around him. Matthew returned fire methodically, years of training taking over. He heard a cry of pain, one of the Houston brothers staggering back, clutching his arm. You're outnumbered, Zane. Frank shouted. Don't be a fool. Inside the cabin, Willa was terrified but clear-headed. She looked around frantically for something, anything to help. Her eyes fell on Matthew's spare revolver, kept in a box under the bed. She'd seen him cleaning it one evening. Taking a deep breath, she crawled to the bed and retrieved the weapon. It was heavier than she expected, but she'd grown up with brothers who'd taught her the basics of shooting. Still, her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded. Outside, the gunfight intensified. Matthew was holding his ground, but he was pinned down at the corner of the cabin. If they circled around behind him, Willa made her decision. Keeping low, she moved to the window facing the side of the cabin, away from the main firefight. Sure enough, one of the men was attempting to flank Matthew's position. She raised the revolver, steadied her hands as best she could, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the man and alert Matthew to the danger. He spun and fired in one fluid motion, dropping the would-be ambusher with a shot to the leg. Willa, get down, Matthew shouted, diving toward the porch as more bullets flew. For several tense minutes, the gunfight continued. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Zane. Frank's voice sounded strained now. This is getting us nowhere. We didn't come to kill you. Could have fooled me, Matthew called back. We brought your share, like I said. $5,000. It's yours, we just wanted to clear the slate. Matthew's laugh was bitter. Clear the slate? You left me for dead, Frank. We thought you were. By the time we heard different, you disappeared. Took us till now to track you down. There was a pause. We're going to leave the money here and ride out. No hard feelings. And then what? You tell everyone where to find me? Send the law my way. No law, Frank insisted. We're going to Mexico. This was our last stop. Genuine offer, Matty. Take it or leave it. Matthew considered. If they were truly heading for the border, it might be best to let them go. A continued gunfight would only bring the sheriff and raise questions he couldn't answer, especially with Willa present. Leave the money by the big rock, he directed. Then ride out. I see you in these parts again, I won't aim for the leg. There was murmured conversation among the men, then the sound of movement. Matthew kept his rifle trained on the shadows, watching as a saddlebag was placed by the rock. It's been real, Matty, Frank called out. Hope you find what you're looking for. The riders mounted up, supporting their injured companion, and slowly rode away. Matthew remained vigilant until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely into the night. Only then did he lower his rifle and rush inside to find Willa. She was sitting on the floor by the window, the revolver still in her hands, her face pale but composed. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, kneeling beside her. She shook her head. No, but you are. She pointed to his arm, where a bullet had grazed him, leaving a bloody furrow. It's nothing, he said, suddenly aware of how much she had witnessed, how much she had likely pieced together. Shame washed over him, followed by resignation. Whatever fragile connection had been growing between them was surely shattered now. Who were they, Matthew? She asked quietly, placing the revolver on the floor between them. He couldn't meet her eyes. Men I used to ride with. The Tucson job. Was that a bank robbery? Matthew nodded, waiting for her to recoil, to demand he take her back to town immediately. Instead, she reached out and touched his wounded arm gently. This needs cleaning, she said. Sit down and let me tend to it. Bewildered, he complied, watching as she gathered water and clean cloths. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with steady hands. You're not asking, he said finally. I think I understand enough, she replied, wrapping a bandage around his arm. You were part of their gang. Something happened. You left that life behind. They left me behind, Matthew corrected. After a job went wrong. I stayed to hold off the law while they escaped with the money. They took my share and rode out. Left me to die or hang. But you survived. Yes. And came here to hide. To start over, he said, then added more honestly. Or just to disappear. Willa finished bandaging his arm, then sat back on her heels, studying his face. Are you still disappearing, Matthew? The question struck him like a physical blow. Was he? These past weeks with Willa, working on the schoolhouse, sharing quiet evenings in his cabin for the first time in years, he'd felt like a man instead of a ghost. I don't know, he admitted. She nodded, as if his uncertainty was answer enough. What will you do now? Will you go after them? No, he said, surprising himself with how certain he felt. That life is over for me. And the money they left. Matthew hadn't even thought about the saddlebag by the rock. Should be returned to the bank in Tucson, he said slowly. Anonymously. Willa's expression softened. That's the right choice. Doesn't change what I did. No, she agreed. But it matters what you do next. She took a deep breath. Matthew, I should return to town tomorrow. The school opens in 3 days, and there's still work to be done. He nodded, feeling a hollow opening inside him at the thought of her leaving. I'll take you back in the morning. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, will you come to town for the school opening? The children would like to meet the man who rebuilt their schoolhouse. Willa, he shook his head. After tonight, it's not safe for me to stay in these parts. Those men might talk. Word gets around. So you'll run again? Find another place to hide. There was an edge to her voice now. It's what I know how to do. Willa stood abruptly, wincing slightly as she put weight on her healing ankle. Then I wish you well, Matthew Zane. Thank you for your hospitality. She turned toward the bedroom, but Matthew caught her hand. Willa, wait. She looked down at him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm not a good man, he said hoarsely. What happened tonight, that's the truth of who I was. Who I might still be. No, she said firmly. The truth of who you are is the man who helped a stranger with her trunks, who repaired a schoolhouse for children he'd never met, who gave up his bed for a week to care for a woman with a sprained ankle. Her voice softened. The truth is in what you choose now, Matthew. He stood, still holding her hand, suddenly aware of how close they were, of how her presence had somehow become essential to him. And if I choose to stay, he asked, hardly daring to hope, then you'd find you're not as alone as you thought, she whispered. Matthew's free hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. I don't deserve a second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance, she repeated, her earlier words carrying new weight. Let me help you find yours. He kissed her then, gently at first, then with a hunger born of years of isolation and the sudden, overwhelming realization that he didn't want to be alone anymore. That perhaps he never had. Willa returned to town the next day, but Matthew didn't disappear. Instead, he delivered the money anonymously to the sheriff with a note explaining it was stolen funds that needed to be returned to the Tucson bank. He kept nothing for himself. The school opened as planned, with Willa presiding over 20 eager and some not-so-eager students. Matthew attended the ceremony, standing at the back, uncomfortable with the attention but unwilling to disappoint Willa. Over the following months, Globe witnessed the slow transformation of the reclusive rancher. He began taking on carpentry jobs in town, his skill and reliability earning him steady work. He attended church occasionally, sitting in the back pew, gradually becoming a familiar face rather than a mystery. And every Sunday, he could be seen escorting the schoolteacher to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the two of them deep in conversation, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances and approving smiles of the townsfolk. When winter came, bringing rare snow to the high desert, Matthew finally made the decision he'd been contemplating for months. On Christmas Eve, under a sky brilliant with stars, he asked Willa to be his wife. Are you certain? She asked, her face glowing in the lantern light outside the schoolhouse. You've built a life here now. People respect you. If they ever learned about your past, then they'll learn about my present too, he said. I can't change what I did, Willa, but every day with you, I become more the man I want to be instead of the man I was running from. They were married in the spring of 1884, in the schoolhouse Matthew had rebuilt. Sheriff Holbrook stood as his best man, a development that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. The children from Willa's class sang songs and showered them with flower petals as they emerged as husband and wife. That evening, as they sat on the porch of Matthew's cabin, now their home, expanded and improved over the winter, Willa rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Staying in one place? Being known?" Matthew looked out at the desert, painted gold by the setting sun, then down at their intertwined hands. "Not for a second," he said. "You walked into my silence, Willa. You heard what I couldn't say." "And what was that?" she asked, smiling up at him. "That even when a man thinks he's beyond redemption, love finds a way to bring him home." In the years that followed, Matthew and Willa Zane became pillars of the growing community of Globe. They welcomed 2 sons and a daughter, built a proper ranch that became known for its fine horses, and watched as Arizona territory moved toward statehood. The past didn't disappear. There were moments when shadows from Matthew's former life threatened to resurface. But each time, Willa stood beside him, her strength and faith unwavering, reminding him that a man is defined not by his worst mistakes, but by his best choices. And Matthew's best choice, without question, had been to open the door when Willa Zimmerman walked into his silence and taught him how to speak again, not just with words, but with his heart.